Okay, great. There is a clicker actually today. That's fantastic. Thank you very much. So I'm extremely happy to be here, and thanks again to Neta for the invitation. It's been a privilege to be with you. Yesterday was I learned already so much. So today it's not really. Is it working? No.
I think try
I have
to.
to be closer. Okay.
I think so.
Yeah. So we're presenting something that is embarrassingly underdeveloped in news, so apologies in advance for this. When I told the role I'm presenting our paper, he said, since when this is became actually a paper. So, but I bear with me. At least I think we have something to discuss. So the question we're looking at is a perennial sort of question, an ongoing question in this literature, in the migration literature, which is essentially whether migrants adopt the dominant values and norms. And by norms, I will be very agnostic. I'm not distinguishing between, let's say, internalized norms or sort of Beckerian sort of externalized norms. But do they generally adopt the values, let's say, norms of the prevailing native groups in the countries of destination? And of course, there is a voluminous literature already on this. And that literature tends to point to two patterns. On the one hand, there is some acculturation, as we call it, like there is some convergence, especially for later generations, but this is by far from complete, obviously, and as a result of the fact that it is way far from complete, we have a lot of diversity around the world, and this diversity has even sparked questions such as the one asked by Bissine and Verdier as to why don't we all melt into the pot. And the answer that Bissine and Verdier gave to address this question, why do we not all melt into the pot, is essentially vertical transmission. Right? I don't know if you recognize the movie here. Anyone recognize the movie? No. This is Do the Right Thing by Spike Lee. And so backing out here, this is Giancarlo Esposito. He asks the owner of the Italian pizzeria, why do you, Sal, why don't you have African Americans in the world? Well, because Sal has Italian Americans in the world, right? So, and that is in a way the story of vertical transmissions. Migrants go to a given place with a cultural baggage that comes from the place of origin. And when you look into this from the more micro level perspective, you look into the role of families and the role of parents who act as sort of parochial altruists and transmit their cultural traits to their children, and that is then generating variation even in the place of destination. And there is a lot of empirical evidence supporting this claim. And this evidence comes from the so-called epidemiological approach. So essentially what researchers in this framework do is that they exploit the portability of culture as a source of identification. So they compare essentially migrants who come from different cultures, different cultural origins, but they all live in the same institutional environments. And there is a lot of, many examples. For example, just to show you one example, Guizzo, Sapienza, and Tsingalas, what they do is that they use the average levels of trust of several countries, which are the countries of origin of migrants who are responding into service in the US, and they show how they predict migrants' trust, interpersonal trust among migrants who live in the US. So in a way, people who live already in the same country for more or less the same period of time, they differ in their levels of interpersonal trust in ways that can be predicted on the basis of the average level of trust in their own country of origin. Oh, this doesn't work. Okay, sorry for that. And there are many other examples of the same logic. So there is evidence on sort of vertical transmission when it comes to female participation in the labor market, attitudes towards distribution, female turnout. So what we want to do in this paper is in a way to turn the epidemiological approach upside down. We want to do exactly the opposite. So we want to look at what happens when you hold the cultural background constant, and you see how change, and that's kind of important in our identification strategy at least, or assumption, how change in norms and values among natives in the country of destination affects migrant attitudes. So in a way, we're looking at instead of looking at what happens when two like a Syrian versus an Italian arrive in the US and they live exactly the same point, exactly the same point in time and live for exactly the same in the same area in the same sort of state for the same period. We're looking at and see what happens and how they differ according to their background. We're asking two Syrians, one arrives in Baden-Württemberg and the other one arrives in Dresden in the same period. How would they start changing or being different from each other according to the local norms and values that they will be sort of exposed to when in the places where they arrive? That's the question we try to do, to sort of address. Of course, we are not the first to look into what we would call horizontal transmission, right? It's the reverse of vertical transmission, horizontal transmission. There's a lot of work on acculturation, as I said from the beginning, but this work tends to differ from what we try to do in three respects. The main aim in that work is to compare generations. So the question typically is whether the next generation, the second generation, generation 1.5, for example, tend to seem to be more likely to sort of integrate compared to the previous generations. The measure of integration or assimilation is given through benchmarks in terms of levels, so basically convergence in attitude between natives and migrants. And this literature assumes in a way that what migrants observe is national means. The target is a national mean. So what we will do is we will will not compare between generations, we will compare within generations, and importantly, the level similarity, think of a survey in which we're comparing one group with the national average, or the native average, to put it more precisely. Of course, that national average has, can be the result of selection of immigrants to those averages, which is very important in this case because parents may invest precisely in finding this place instead of investing in transmitting the cultural trait. It could be a different reverse way, an alternative way of vertical transmission that could be attributed to horizontal transmission. Or, of course, it can be because of unobserved confounders. Those levels are, of course, predicted on the basis of characteristics that can affect also independently the migrants themselves. So in order to address this, we are going to look at change in norms since arrival. We are not going to look into levels. So, as I said, what we're going to be using is how a given norm changes since the time of arrival, which in a way entails a difference also with respect to the epidemiological approach. The epidemiological approach assumes that the destination country and norms and values are constant. These are the ones, and that's it. Whereas we are saying, they might change over time, and we are going to exploit this variation. And we are not going to assume national means, we're going to try to get closer into regional norms. That's hence my example between, let's say, Dresden and Baden-Württemberg in this case, Stuttgart, for example.
Yes, just a clarification.
Yes.
Is that the first time that somebody looked at regional versus national?
Yes, to the best of my knowledge it is, but I'm not sure.
Okay.
To the best of my knowledge. Maybe I'm wrong, there's a lot of work, maybe there's something out there that I haven't seen. Sorry, yeah, maybe. So I won't go into the contribution right now. I will maybe tell afterwards to them. We think that this work is also kind of interesting for people who are not necessarily interested in migrant acculturation. We try to make a contribution, obviously, along those lines, but we think also that it's a case of political socialization, because in political socialization or socialization according to cultural economists. So political sociologists tend to either expect everything happens in early adolescence, nothing changes since then, or people learn throughout their lifetime with differential, let's say, leverage according to whether they are in the early adulthood or later on. And so we think that immigrants arriving into a place constitute a good case to test exactly this idea, because they are socialized elsewhere and they are now in a different environment. And more, in theoretical work on the economics of cultural transmission, starting from Vicino Verdiere, and then you have the Tabellini model, which is the complementarities between cultural institutions, the Guiso, Sapienza, and Zingales model, which is precisely the kind of an extension to Vicino Verdiere on the basis of how the offspring learns from the environment and as a result might potentially change and update the parental trait. And something similar, although not in the cultural transmission tradition, is offered by Piketty in his sort of theoretical model of how we learn, how social mobility affects our perceptions. So this learning process, in a way that I think is kind of inherently implies that we kind of, there is some sort of, I don't know if it's persuasion, social cover, or anticipated persuasion, as Leo was discussing yesterday, but it requires some sort of appraisal or acceptance of the values and norms of the environment in which you are encountering yourself. Okay, so what do we do exactly? We take the World Value Survey and the European Value Survey, and we use the levels that we find available, which unfortunately for now it's only NUTS 1. We will try to go lower into that level. NUTS 1 means states. In Germany it means Länder. In Italy it means overarching regions. So, I mean, it's not as obviously fine grade as we would like it to be. But in any case, what we try to do is we take questions that are repeated over several waves that relate to what we would call values and norms. Questions, I will be explicit, I will show you them later, about sexuality, gender, democracy, good citizenship, and others. And we create, let's say, a panel of averages across these NUTS 1 levels. We didn't manage to have the map to show you the map yet, unfortunately, but think of a map where you have different values of these averages at NUTS 1 levels. Over time, every time you have a given wave that is repeated, either at the World Value Survey or the European Value Survey. So we create those regional wave averages, and we interpolate for every year that we do not have available, we interpolate in between. So between regional waves are interpolated. We do not extrapolate. So if someone has arrived before the starting point in our measurement according to these waves, then these people are out. So you are only interpolated. There is only an imputation only if there is a year in which it's between the year you arrived and the next year that we have available. We could do MRP, post-stratification. We didn't do yet. We can discuss later on what the difference would be. MRP will probably smooth things out, so we will probably, if anything, eat some of the variation. We haven't done that yet, so for the moment, all we're doing is a linear interpolation, and otherwise the difference between the change, between the delta, let's say, between the starting point when the immigrant arrives and the time in which they are giving the response in the survey. The temporal rate is between 1981 and 2020 at the maximum. Typically it's lower than that. It's lower because you have so different countries are included in different waves. Some questions sometimes are omitted, and generally you have some other issues when we create, in a way, the data. So what are the norms or values? These are the democratic norms. So having a democratic political system, a strong leader, all these questions about whether it could be, agree, disagree, kind of lighter type questions. We create, we take the first component of a principal component analysis of this, and then you have good citizenship norms, and so it's basically, not cheating taxes, not free riding in the public transport, or not accepting bribes. And then you have single questions for gender norms. If in harsh times, men should be given more right to work than women. Sexuality norms, it's a question on homosexuality that ranges from 1 to 10, and justifiable, where it's justifiable and whether abortion is justifiable, and abortion norms. So these are the 5 set of these are our outcomes. And the variation, as I said, comes from precisely the way these averages vary over time across regions. So this is this is what we're going to leverage. These differences between regions over time. And so to that map, we are going to plug in the responses of the migrants. Okay, so from the same surveys, we have migrants. These are all native averages that move over time. They are not including, obviously, the migrants. And then to that, we're going to bring in the migrants from the same survey for now, but we will also add the ESS because it has also more information about the migrants. What do we know about these migrants? We know when they arrived in the country, in the region, the NUTS 1 region they arrived, and where from. We assume, of course, that we have to assume, unfortunately, that they remain in the same area and in the same NUTS 1 since the time they arrived. And so what we try to do now, in order to identify the effect of the change in norms among the natives on the profile, the attitudinal profile of the migrants, we need to we need to address these following challenges, three challenges. First of all, migrants can select also into regional norms the same way as they could have selected into national norms. And these regional norms do not vary independently either across space or over time. In a way, this is not a level problem, but it is kind of a parallel trend problem or a kind of a confounder on the trends problem. So how do we try to address them? We try to address selection by looking into change itself. Like the fact that we are looking into change in norms, we think is accounting for migrant origin, for origin of migrants. So using migrant origin fixed effects implies that, if there is any selection, this selection should be probably at the levels. It shouldn't be on the slopes. When I choose where to go, I don't choose to go knowing and predicting the slope. I choose on the basis of the constant. So we're using change means that we should be less less vulnerable to this sort of challenge, and it's especially when you then start including and trying to get the identification right through the fixed effect. So we have not one fixed effects, year of interview fixed effects, and year of arrival fixed effects, in order to account precisely for the fact that these norms may not vary independently across space or over time. And here is, in a way, the variation that we have available. So here is a case where we don't really have much variation. You see, this is the overall variation in democratic norms, and this is the variation in change in democratic norms from T0 from time zero to the moment in which the respondent provides responses in the survey. So this is the case of democratic norms. Reversely, when you look at sexuality norms, you have a lot more variation, right? So exactly. Wow. So this is the variation that happens within the natives, right? This is natives always. These are a predictor or treatment here. So this is the overall variation in homosexuality norms, and this is essentially the variation over time in the time that we have since years of arrival, and this is the delta from T0 to T equals N, or it equals T capital in a way. Yes?
Quick question. You don't have the same graphical visualization of variation in norms in the countries of origin, do you?
No.
Okay.
Okay, that would be interesting, yes, that's true. Because they are not included most. Well, we could, for some of them, we could, yeah. I'm sure for some of them we can provide them. We haven't done that. Thank you, Rachel, yes. Yes, thank you. We haven't, yeah, that's true. That would be a good point, actually. Yeah, we have to, I'll write it down. We should do that. Well, not for all of them, but for those that are available, we can definitely do this. Yes, definitely. So you see, the variation, the mean delta per nat1 since arrival, instead of in terms of standard deviation change, sometimes it's very small, as in democratic norms, sometimes actually quite big, as in gender norms, or in sexuality norms, or in abortion norms.
Elias?
Yes?
Did you check if the last three questions constitute one dimension?
We didn't. We could. Right. That's a very good point as well. We haven't. That's true. We haven't.
Let's wait with questions.
But that's a very good point. Yeah, we should. And I don't know why we haven't.
I blame myself. I set a bad example. I'm sorry. Mine was clarificatory.
Sorry. Yes. Very good point. Thanks, no. Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean,
you're a super precedent.
I am.
Super precedent.
So here are the results that we have for now. So as I said, yes, 2 million. But unfortunately, it's enough given the result we have. So this is the good citizenship norms at arrival, and so this is the delta of natives predicting the response of the migrants. I don't want to get into right now discussing the magnitude, because with the fixed, so basically here we don't have any fixed effect, and then we start including fixed effects. All the fixed effects are plus at the end we have a country specific trend, right? We have, of course, fixed effects for the years. We have fixed effects for the year of arrival, for the year of interview, but we can still have it for the country specific trend at the very end. This is so we find results for good citizenship for sexuality norms pretty much along the way. The same also for abortion norms. And we start not finding very strong effects for gender norms, although they are significant up until they completely get killed by the country time trend. And we don't find for the democratic norms. My speculation for the democratic norms, but it's only speculation, is that given that these people do not have political rights, especially in the beginning of their arrival, this is something that they are going to be less, exposed to compared to other issues that they can be exposed to in their everyday sort of socialization in the new environment. And a very last thing before I close is that, as I said, one of the reason we are using delta is one of the reasons at least is because we think it helps selection. So if the work is done because of the delta rather than because of the fact that they're selecting where they're going, then when we're using labels, we shouldn't find the same results. So when we are using levels instead of delta, levels in the moment of arrival at T0, the level doesn't predict anything. It's not a good predictor. It's not a good predictor of a migrant attitudes. The only exception could be democratic norms, which is actually where we don't even find effects of the delta anyway. That's all I had for now. So as I said, moving forward, we're going to try to sort of be more precise in measuring the regional norms. We're going to add more data, and we're then going to look into Germany specifically because Germany has a whole survey on the SOIP survey of refugees, which would allow us to use more information about country of origin and about also other characteristics of the migrants when they arrive. That's all. Thank you so much.